To liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the supreme and precious Bodhicitta. Today we begin our teachings on the Diamond Sutra. Those who have not received empowerments are welcome to listen. If you don't have the time for long-term Dharma studies and can only join us for a day or two, you are also welcome. In short, I have given permission for anyone to attend these teachings on the Diamond Sutra, even those who may hold wrong views. It will take about a month or two to cover the Diamond Sutra. The exact schedule is not yet finalized. Before receiving the Diamond Sutra, it is essential to understand the etiquette of listening to the Dharma. For example, we must maintain pure perception and supreme bodhicitta. There should be no talking during the teachings. There are many other rules for listening to the Dharma. I won't go into great detail here, as they are explained extensively in the words of my perfect teacher. Here is what I am thinking. Before we dive into the actual text of the Diamond Sutra each day, I will briefly discuss the merits of the Diamond Sutra. This is intended to help everyone develop a sense of faith. The merits I will mention are mainly stories from the Sutra on the merits of the Diamond Sutra. However, this Sutra on the merits of the Diamond Sutra had not been translated into the Chinese Tripitaka before. I have completed the translation this time. By sharing these brief accounts with you daily, you may develop even deeper faith in the Diamond Sutra. My purpose in teaching the Diamond Sutra is to personally purify karmic obscurations, gain some merit, and accumulate provisions. That is my own objective. I believe those of you listening to these teachings might have the same goal in mind. Simply hearing the Diamond Sutra once brings immense merit. Every day, I will start with a story from the Sutra on the merits of the Diamond Sutra. In a few days, we can distribute the book to you. It contains about 15 stories that I have already finished translating. I will tell you the stories first, and then you can read the book. This might be a better approach. Otherwise, if you read the stories first, I won't have much left to talk about. So once we have finished all the stories, we will give you the sutra on the merits of the Diamond Sutra. The first story I'll share today is, once there was a monastery in a certain place, and in that monastery lived a novice monk. This novice was very intelligent. He and some friends heard that there was a highly skilled physiognomist in another town. So they all went there together to have their fortunes read. The physiognomist told the novice monk, "You will only live until you are 18. He then gave predictions to the others as well, describing their lifespans and the circumstances of their deaths. After that, they returned. Sometime later, the novice found that the predictions for his friends had all come true. Upon seeing this, the novice monk remembered what the physiognomist had told him as well, that he did not have much time left to live. Filled with deep anxiety, the novice made a request to his master, saying, "I wish to go to a secluded place to practice diligently. I heard there are many sacred scriptures there, and I hope to find a practice for longevity." With his master's permission, the novice set off for that quiet retreat. The place held many sutras of Shakyamuni Buddha. He prayed fervently over and over, "May I find a sacred text that grants long life." Then he randomly drew a volume from the collection, and it turned out to be the Diamond Sutra. He was overjoyed and began to chant it with unwavering devotion. One afternoon, 2 bhikshus appeared and said to him, "The merit of chanting the Diamond Sutra is immeasurable. Therefore your lifespan shall be immeasurable, and your merit shall be immeasurable as well." He remained in that secluded place for 20 years. 20 years later, he went back to see the physiognomist, who was absolutely astonished. "How can this be?" the man asked. "Was my reading inaccurate? What exactly happened? I predicted you would die very young. What practice did you do to gain such longevity?" The novice replied, "It is through practicing the Diamond Sutra that I have lived this long." When people heard about this, many began to uphold and chant the Diamond Sutra. Thus, for the purpose of extending one's life, chanting the Diamond Sutra carries incredible merit. This man eventually lived to be 95, and after his passing, he was reborn in a pure land. That is one account. There is also a story from the Han region. Long ago, during the 3 Kingdoms period, there was another novice monk whose teacher told him he wouldn't live long. He searched everywhere for a way to extend his life. Later, from another master, he received a copy of the Diamond Sutra. By chanting it, he truly achieved longevity. Years later, when he went to visit his original teacher, the teacher was also very surprised, saying, "Didn't I tell you before that your life would be quite short? How is it that you are still alive today?" He replied, "It is because I have been chanting the Diamond Sutra." This monk eventually lived to be 100 years old. Such stories exist. So, if you wish to live a long and healthy life, then please chant the Diamond Sutra diligently. We are also about to start the teachings on Lama Yangtik. You must not die before then. You must maintain a healthy, long-lived body. I will stop with these two stories regarding the merits. Now let us begin our study of the Diamond Sutra. I have not taught the Diamond Sutra before. In Tibetan Buddhism, it is also known as the 300 verses on Prajnaparamita. That is one of its titles. As for its influence in Chinese Buddhism, it goes without saying. Everyone knows it well. Ever since Kumarajiva's translation, this sutra has become extremely famous throughout the Han region. Many have attained realization through the Diamond Sutra, and there have been all kinds of auspicious signs. We needn't dwell too much on that. In the context of Tibetan Buddhism, there are some notable differences between the Diamond Sutra and other Prajnaparamita teachings. In most parts of the Tibetan areas, there is a certain tradition. For instance, when someone passes away, 100 recitations of the Diamond Sutra and 1,000 recitations of the Sutra of Liberation are performed. This is considered deeply significant for the deceased's liberation. During longevity ceremonies or auspicious rites, people are often invited to recite the Diamond Sutra. This is the tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. In today's Jokang Temple in Lhasa and in the Mongolian archives, there are versions of the Diamond Sutra written in gold and silver. However, commentaries on the Diamond Sutra by Tibetan masters are almost non-existent. I heard there is only one Indian commentary on the Diamond Sutra. In Tibetan Buddhism, Choni Shardrup wrote a commentary, but I heard it is very brief. I haven't read it myself. Aside from that, there are practically no other commentaries. In the Han region, many masters have taught the Diamond Sutra, and there are numerous commentaries and study reports. Some say there are 50 different commentaries, others say more than 100. Regardless, there are a great many. Most of you have likely read some of them. So, how shall I teach it this time? Since there are no commentaries in Tibetan Buddhism, I cannot rely on existing commentaries to give this teaching. I can only rely on my own ability to explain it to you through my understanding of the Tibetan stanzas. I hope that while you study the Diamond Sutra, you will also consult the commentaries from the Han region. I hope that over the next month or two, you will come to understand the principles it teaches and what kind of scripture the Diamond Sutra really is. This is something everyone should clarify. On one hand, the merit of hearing it is inconceivable. The latter part of the sutra specifically discusses this merit. On the other hand, my hope is that you will use the Diamond Sutra to propagate the Dharma and benefit beings. This would be of great significance for people in the Han region, as they hold the Diamond Sutra in very high regard. Whether you study Zen, Pure Land, or the Huayan school and so forth, the Diamond Sutra is recognized by every tradition. Thus, when masters in China and abroad spread the Buddha Dharma, they often focus on the Diamond Sutra. For the disciples from Larung Gar 5 Sciences Buddhist Academy, if you return home and try to teach the Lama Yangtik, people may not necessarily be ready to accept it. But if you teach the Diamond Sutra, everyone will likely be delighted. Moreover, since many people already chant it regularly, helping them understand its merit is truly meaningful. Otherwise, some people might study Tibetan Buddhism and then go back and disparage the Diamond Sutra, saying it or the Shurangama Sutra are inferior. That is a very grave matter. So, in teaching the Diamond Sutra this time, I first want you to understand that Tibetan and Han Buddhism are essentially in perfect harmony. Secondly, when you propagate the Dharma, you should have a pure oral transmission. So once we finish the entire sutra, I intend to give you the transmission in Tibetan. In terms of merit and blessing, this might offer something unique. Today, we begin by analyzing the title of the sutra. For every sutra or shastra, the title is very important. Regarding these teachings on the Diamond Sutra, many people have offered suggestions. Some suggested teaching it from the perspective of Dzogchen, others suggested Mahamudra. There were all sorts of requests. If I possessed enough wisdom in my own mind stream, I could certainly say more. However, I think the key for this study is to understand exactly what the Diamond Sutra is saying. Otherwise, never mind Dzogchen. We might not even grasp it from a Sutrayana perspective. Many masters and lay people in the Han region have taught this sutra, and I have read some of their works. But I often feel that certain parts are not fully complete, as if the most profound aspects haven't been reached. Therefore, we should first master the Sutrayana view. The Diamond Sutra conveys the view of Madhyamaka Prasangika. If we truly understand the Sutrayana view, it becomes very easy to integrate Dzogchen and Mahamudra. So we must first understand its Sutrayana meaning. If we don't even have that foundation, explaining it directly through Dzogchen might be quite difficult. In any case, let us analyze it step by step. As we all know, the title of any scripture is vital. For those with sharp faculties, just by looking at the title, they can roughly grasp the content. The full title of this sutra is the Diamond Cutter Prajnaparamita Sutra. The words diamond cutter exist in the Tibetan version, as well as in some Sanskrit versions. I see that both masters Xuanzang and Yijing translated it this way. However, in Kumarajiva's translation, it is simply called the Diamond Prajnaparamita Sutra, omitting the words for cutter. So what does cutter mean? It means it can cut through our self-grasping, both the grasping at a self of persons and a self of phenomena. As you know, there are several ways sutras are named. One is based on the meaning, and another is based on a metaphor. I believe this sutra is named after a metaphor. Why use the metaphor of a diamond? What are the characteristics of a diamond? The sadhana for subduing Mara describes several qualities, such as being indestructible, unbreakable, and immutable. There are 7 such traits. A diamond can destroy all things, but nothing else can destroy a diamond. In other words, a diamond is something exceptionally hard. Some Buddhist stories mention that the Vajra scepter carried by Shakra was crafted from the bones of an ancient sage. It could destroy anyone it struck, yet nothing could destroy the Vajra itself. This sutra is like Shakra's Vajra scepter. Why do we say this? Because the Diamond Sutra teaches prajna emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness that is free from all conceptual elaborations. Such wisdom can demolish all the world's distorted views and shatter all attachments. Yet no attachment can ever damage prajna emptiness. So, diamond signifies this indestructible hardness. If we truly understand the meaning of the Diamond Sutra, no heresy from any Maras or non-Buddhists can ever destroy our view. That is how I interpret the title. I still hope you will consult more reference materials. There are quite many commentaries in the Han region, each with different methods of explanation. I hope you can cross-reference them in some places. Don't assume that some Han master's teachings are not good. That would be wrong. I have never taught this before, nor have I formally studied or researched it. You could say, I'm only now encountering the Diamond Sutra. I've read it a little in the past, but I haven't delved into it deeply. In contrast, many Han masters have spent their entire lives researching the Diamond Sutra, so we cannot say that Han masters do not teach it well. Within certain commentaries, there is truly inconceivable lineage transmission and mind-to-mind blessing. So while you listen to me, do not disparage other great masters. As for Prajnaparamita, you all know it means wisdom that reaches the other shore. This sutra is named after a metaphor. It belongs to the Prajnaparamita collection. In the Tibetan version of the Diamond Sutra, there is a translator's homage to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This was added by the translators. From this homage, we can infer that it belongs to the Sutra Pitaka of the Tripitaka. That covers the title. This is how it can be understood. Historically, there are several translations of the Diamond Sutra. The earliest was translated by Kumarajiva. As you know, his translations carry inconceivable power and blessing because he was a true great Mahasiddha. It was translated during the later Qin dynasty, over 1,600 years ago. Later, during the Northern Way, Bodhiruchi also translated it, though his version is not very popular in Chinese Buddhism. He also translated the Shastra on the Sutra of Maitreya's questions. Looking at the current Tripitaka catalogue, Bodhiruchi's translations are quite numerous. Then, during the southern dynasties, the master Paramartha translated a third version. During the Sui dynasty, Dharmagupta also translated a version, but this too is not very common in Chinese Buddhism. Finally, in the Tang dynasty, Masters Xuanzang and Yijing also translated this sutra. When compared to the Tibetan, Master Yijing's translation aligns very closely. In contrast, Kumarajiva's version seems to have some discrepancies in certain places. I believe there are two possible reasons for this. First, Buddhism was very vibrant in India at the time, and there were many different Sanskrit manuscripts, so they might have used different source texts. That is one reason. The second reason is that when Kumarajiva was translating, the scale was enormous. He had about 500 people in his translation bureau. As he translated, he would dictate while those around him took notes. Since there were no recording devices back then, people relied entirely on memory to write things down, so some omissions might have occurred. However, Kumarajiva was a great Mahasiddha, and he blessed these sutras with his words of truth. Therefore, I believe his translation carries immense merit and blessing. Many people experience powerful responses when reading his version. Countless people have attained realization through it. History proves that Kumarajiva's translation has inconceivable blessing. When we analyze the text, there may be slight differences between his and Master Xuanzang's, but do not assume a version is bad just because it differs. Each contains unique intent and blessings. We have just listed the 6 translations, including those by Kumarajiva, the northern and southern dynasties, and the Sui and Tang dynasties. Currently, we only have these 6 Chinese translations. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is only one translation of the Diamond Sutra. I have compared them before. The versions from Lhasa and Qinghai are identical. In the Kangyur, the Diamond Sutra belongs to the Prajna Paramita section. Now, let us begin the scripture itself. Thus have I heard. At one time the Buddha was staying in Shravasti at Jeta's grove in the garden of Anathapindika with a community of 1,150 great bhikshus. First, we look at the origin of this sutra. Many Buddhist sutras begin with such an introduction. Thus have I heard. At one time. These words were added later by the compilers. It means I personally heard this scripture back then, or I heard these Vajra words at such a time. In Buddhism, we have held 3 major councils. As Shakyamuni Buddha approached parinirvana, he granted permission for his disciples to compile his teachings. Furthermore, he authorized that, to inspire faith in people, sutras could begin with, "Thus have I heard," at one time. At the end, words of praise for the Buddha from humans, devas, or Naga kings could also be added. And in the middle, phrases like Subhuti asked the world-honored one, or Manjushri asked the world-honored one, could be included as connecting text. This is why in the current Tripitaka we frequently encounter such language. These are known as the Buddha's authorized words of blessing. As you know, some parts of the sutras were spoken by the Buddha himself, some by disciples through his blessing, and some were authorized to be added later. Therefore, certain phrases in this sutra are these authorized words of blessing. For example, "Thus have I heard at one time." This was not spoken directly by Shakyamuni Buddha, but he gave his consent before his passing. He said that when his teachings were compiled, these words could be added. After the Buddha's parinirvana, his disciples compiled his teachings in 3 councils. The first council was held shortly after his passing. The second was 110 years later. For the third, some say it was 180 years after his passing, while others say around 400 years later. After these 3 councils, the entire Tripitaka of the Buddha was finally recorded in written form. That was the process. Generally, the compilers of the Tripitaka were as follows. Ananda compiled the Sutra Pitaka. Being foremost in learning, he was the one who compiled it. Next, Upali compiled the Vinaya Pitaka. Foremost in keeping the precepts, he was its compiler. The Abhidharma Pitaka was compiled by Mahakashyapa. Since the Diamond Sutra belongs to the Sutra Pitaka, the phrase, "Thus have I heard," at one time Ituktas was actually added by Ananda. These are Ananda's words. It is important to understand this. Some say it was added by Kashyapa, but I believe it was not added by him. It should have been added by Ananda. Since this scripture belongs to the Sutra Pitaka, and the compiler of the Sutra Pitaka was Ananda, that is how "thus have I heard" at one time is explained. It means I heard this at a certain time. But why does it say at one time? Shakyamuni Buddha left home at the age of 29, practiced austerities for 6 years, and began teaching the Dharma after he was 35. Some sources say the Buddha taught for 49 years, while others say it was 45 years. As for which year or day each sutra was spoken, it is not specified in detail. Since the Buddha gave so many teachings, at one time can be understood as on a certain day. There is another way to interpret this. When Shakyamuni Buddha taught the Dharma, he could manifest in the past, present, and future, teaching before various beings simultaneously. This state of being is truly inconceivable, far beyond the reach of ordinary imagination. So, at one time, encompasses the past, present, and future. Before all beings throughout the 10 directions, the Buddha used diverse skillful means to expound various Dharma gates. It implies that at an indefinite time he spoke an indefinite number of teachings. It also carries that meaning. Well, we will stop here for today.
Bandara